was going through this process of doing these episodes on fairies and my studies on fairies. Fairies I've kind of been familiar with, but when I haven't personally done like a deep dive on fairy folklore and fairy witchcraft and magic practices and where they can be found in certain grimoires and things like that. But I was saying to you when we were having this private conversation off the record, and that moving from a city to a smaller place, which particularly where I am now, seems like a very fresh wound of colonialism because it's a younger place.
Right.
And there were First Nations communities here that are just some of the most beautiful and austere and omnipresent. Truly, like the Coast Salish peoples of Western North America. It's incredible. And so I was saying to you, my magic has to change. Like my magic needs to change.
Hello, and welcome to the Spirit Box podcast, where we explore folklore, magic, the world of the spirits, and everything in between. Today, we welcome back the noble and scholarly Douglas Batchelor of the What Magic Is This podcast, which is a podcast for those curious about magic, the occult, witchcraft, the esoteric, the paranormal, and the supernatural. Douglas has been doing magic for close to 20 years and has a wealth of knowledge and experience. And today we focus on how his practice and areas of interest have changed since his recent move to the west of Canada. And we discuss his recent Patreon show on Isabel Gowdy, his remarkable memory and his ability to communicate complex ideas in a way that's digestible and very informative. Now, the title of this show is a reference to a phrase used by John Moriarty in one of his many Irish radio interviews, where he talked about not sitting well with the modern world and feeling its separation from nature acutely. Consequently, he left his academic career and moved home to Ireland, to Connemara in the west of Ireland in County Galway. And the conversation with Douglas reminded me of Moriarty's coming back into wilderness, not least because of their moving location, but in a topic that came up in the Plus show, where we discussed the horror of poorly done TV and film adaptations and how film becomes less story and more spectacle, and that we've exhausted the narrative of that particular form of art. The well, as such, has run dry. So we need to discuss new stories. We need to find new dreams, and we round out the conversation with hope and belief in the younger generations and the generations yet to be born, how they will dream new stories and bring new art into being. The show notes are extensive for this one, so do check them out, as there is a wealth of material to be explored there. Now, if you want to hear the Plus show, very straightforward to do so. Simply click the Linktree link below and sign up to the Patreon. You'll get this Plus show and 3 years of back catalogue. So loads of stuff there to enjoy. Let's get on with the show. Douglas Batchelor, you're very, very welcome back to the Spirit Box. Lovely to have you. Nice to see you, mate.
Nice to see you too, Darren. Man, it's always good to talk. I haven't done a lot of reappearances on podcasts, but I'm super glad that I'm able to come back on your show, because your show has always been. I was talking a little bit about earlier about how my podcast queue is quite long, but I've said it elsewhere, and I'll say it again. If you ever want to stop listening to podcasts, start one of your own. But I find as I go through time, a lot of podcasts have fallen away just because I don't have the time. But your podcast is always there. There's always time for Spirit Box.
Thank you, man, and likewise. Indeed, we'll get to as well. But I loved the Patreon show you did on Isabel Gowdy. That was fantastic.
Yeah.
Really enjoyed that. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. I try with my Patreon stuff to do. I'm getting a little bit more, I don't know, cinematic, operatic. I don't know what the proper term. I'm trying to do something differently with a lot of my Patreon stuff, and I don't know if people are enjoying it. So I'm glad that you did. I think some people, it might throw them for a bit of a loop because I put in like orchestral music and I.
Oh, it's really noticeable. It was really noticeable. Yeah, no.
Right.
But the main takeaway, because I was what was I doing? I was building a wooden chest at the time,
Nice.
right?
Oh, cool.
And listening to you while I was doing it, and I'd stop at some stage and go like, "Fuck me, his production's good." why does my version not sound like this? So yeah, apart from the content, which is wonderful, from a technical perspective, I was admiring your efforts. Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, Isabel's story, to me, I could have done, for those people who don't know who we're talking about, where there's this infamous confession that we have of a 16th century person who was accused of witchcraft and most likely killed because of witchcraft. But her confession is basically like all of the things you can think about witches can be like in her confession. It's really quite incredible. But the way that I wanted to tell the story could have been two ways. It could have just been me being like, and then this happened, and this is what she said, and then this, and this, and
Yeah.
this, and this, and that would have been really, really boring. So I tried to kind of tell it as like, this is what she said, and here are the ramifications of her story.
Yeah.
So meanwhile, in the background, I had, and I hope I don't get sued for it, but I had the orchestral score by James Macmillan called "The Confession of Isabel Gowdy," which is just one of my favorite pieces of or like modern contemporary orchestral score. And so that was underpinning the whole thing, the first half. And yeah, so I went for broke. I hope people enjoyed it.
It was great. It was a great show. I mean, for people who aren't familiar with the kind of the main books on, well, I mean, more broadly, kind of Scottish witchcraft and kind of the various confessions and heresies that were recorded and aggregated. Emma Wilby is just an extraordinary academic, really.
She has done so much, like Cunning Folk and Familiar Spirits enough solidifies her place as a great scholar.
Yeah.
But her book on Isabel Gowdy, also amazing. Her book on the Basque witch trials, also, like, no, everybody forgets that one, but that one is, for me, like, that is great too. I think the Visions of Isabel Gowdy by Emma Wilby is essential reading. It's unfortunate that it's so expensive, but I want everybody to read that book. I want everybody to read that book. It is such a fascinating book, and Emma just handles it so well.
She really does, and I mean, it really got the attention of the kind of I think the occult and I guess more broadly esoteric community, because she says in it. I mean, I read it. I mean, about 18 months ago, or something like that. So my memory's a bit rusty on it, but she gives a quote, basically saying that perhaps people were experiencing communication with a real entity, and actually, Peter Gray mentions it in Apocalyptic Witchcraft. He
That's right.
pulls out that as well, and that for an academic to come to that conclusion is remarkable. Because they do all kinds of mental acrobatics to get to a very, very rational perspective. But she just puts it there in black and white. It's amazing.
Yeah. I think Carlo Ginzburg kind of opened that door, and folks like Emma Wilby are truly like the heirs of Carlo. And there's, sorry for everybody, we're talking about scholars of witchcraft and the occult, and there's this weird thing that happens, particularly amongst people who are magical practitioners, where a lot of times we go to the scholars because what they're doing is actual boots on the ground research from which we can pull ways of operating, anthropological ways of operating, particularly for things like magic. And so when Emma's able to put out a book, even she did that almost in a way also in Cunning Folk and Familiar Spirits. Well, she's just like, what you have to understand about these people is that this was their world, and that we can see it among so many cultures in and around England, is that there might have actually been something to this phenomena. And then she just walks away from that, but it's still there. But it's just fantastic work. And Emma she doesn't do any interviews. She's very mysterious. People have reached out to her, myself included, and crickets for the most part.
I mean, I can imagine she gets an awful lot of attention, and people get tired about talking about the stuff. But one of my real kind of takeaways from kind of studying her work was particularly in the Cunning Folk and Their Familiars book is that she kind of pulls out the pattern of how this happens. She looks at the commonalities between the different cases, and kind of identifies that before the spirit contact took place, whether somebody meets a fairy or they meet the dark man, some kind of trauma happens.
Yeah.
Like, that's the wonderful, mind she has, is that she notes those details and is able to kind of build out the tapestry and make things more real for people. It's remarkable, really.
Absolutely. I think in Isabel's case, in her book, she was talking about how, what was it? The Battle of Aldern that occurred in and around the area where Emma, or where Isabel was, right? And how that might have tied into the experiences of horror that she described, and things that the devil would do and what they would do with the devil, from the devil's commands and things like this sort. So yeah, like we're very, as I, you know what, like I'm a magical practitioner, and I say this, I think we are literally living in the greatest time for magic and the occult. I think it's right. It's literally right now, as much as there's people, talking shit about each other, and there's all these like factions and people fighting and naysaying and gatekeeping and everything. And these are, terms that are, frankly, I don't have a lot of time for it, but the research being done and the links being drawn and all the crazy things that we have access to, we are living in fantastic times. Like it's incredible. We're so lucky to have shows like Spirit Box and everybody that you talk to. You were so lucky to have Glitchbot. We're so lucky to have, like, I hate to say my podcast, but like we are in really great times. Hopefully, I hope my show is doing okay. But no, it's every month I'm consistently knocked aback by some either scholar or practitioner releasing something that is just like mind-blowing, and it happens so often. Like the grimoire revival or the grimoire renaissance is kind of slowing down. It's just because the manuscripts were running out. Like they're being released, and we're kind of we're running out of that stuff. But in other areas, and particularly folklore through witchcraft and things like that, we're finding old documents, and it's quite stunning and shocking. So take advantage. There be hay out there, so or there be sunshine out there, so we might as well make hay. I screwed that up. Wow,
do you know what? I meant to actually mention this before we got into it, but a quick shout out to Ash on our respective patrons who recommended we get the band back together, Doug.
That's right. Ash is one of my favorite people. They redesigned two of my logos. They did their own interpretation of a couple of my logos that I use for my social media and things like that. And an extraordinarily talented artist. And if people are following me on Instagram, you'll find some of my logos towards the end. There'll be a link to her Instagram. Fantastic artist. Man, artists make me so jealous because I am a crap artist, and like I've always been terrible at like drawing. I'm good at like editing and stuff like that, and things like that, and doing film and stuff like that. But drawing by hand, everything I produce turns into it's terrible. So I'm in awe of artistic people, and Ash's. Yes, she's fantastic, and again, thank you. Thanks to her, we're on Spirit Box again, so it's always wonderful.
So, what have you been up to apart from being a bit under the weather?
Man, since we last talked, which I can't even remember when that was, but I was living in my old house. I was in Toronto, and then I had a friend, and that friend eventually turned into my girlfriend. And because my podcast is now my job, I basically said goodbye to Canada's largest city and moved to an island on the west coast of Canada. And it has been very interesting and very enjoyable. Now, in between the recording of that episode and the recording of this episode, Dara and I had a short little conversation just privately, just talking about things. It was towards the beginning of when I did a series of episodes on fairies.
That's right.
And I just thought it was good. So if I'm talking about fairies, I got to talk with Dara. And I was just relating to you while I was going through this process of doing these episodes on fairies and my studies on fairies. Fairies I've kind of been familiar with, but when I haven't personally done like a deep dive on fairy folklore and fairy witchcraft and magic practices and where they can be found in certain grimoires and things like that. But I was saying to you when we were having this private conversation off the record, and that moving from a city to a smaller place, which particularly where I am now, seems like a very fresh wound of colonialism because it's a younger place.
Right.
And there were First Nations communities here that are just some of the most beautiful and austere and omnipresent. Truly, like the Coast Salish peoples of Western North America. It's incredible. And so I was saying to you, my magic has to change. Like my magic needs to change. Where I came from, a place which was in the center, an old center of the city in Toronto, which was basically a giant, graveyard. Cities are just giant graveyards. And my magic at that point, particularly for the time that I spent in Toronto, was a lot of visiting cemeteries, a lot of necromancy, and a lot of things of that sort. When I came to this new place, I realized something had to change, and there is a very strange and very spiritual aspect to where I find myself now that kind of slowly got transformed into why I became so interested in fairies and I'm going to say local, more nature-based spirits, because it just doesn't feel like, and this is going to sound horrible, it feels like the bodies are very close to the surface here. And that sounds terrible, but it's true. It's just like there's something here that doesn't feel like there's a lot of there. Of course, there's horror. There's horror anywhere where there's a long line of colonialism. And what happened here is I can go into details if you want, but what happened here is truly terrifying and is so bad. And then there was even stuff as close to like World War I era where they were imprisoning. Canada imprisoned people who looked and or sounded German. And where that happened, there was a giant internment camp where my house is and where I'm staying literally right now.
Wow.
Yeah. So all of this is that I'm trying to say is that, in the last little while since being here, I've been trying to figure out, well, why am I here now? And how does my magic have to adapt? And I was saying, there's this fresh wound of colonialism that the city that I live in has enormous mental health and drug issues, and I'm pretty sure that they're related. And it really is one of those things where my magic has now shifted to one more of rights relations within the territory and within the land that I find myself, and trying to help people truly, and just trying to be more involved in that sense. So my magic has become less ancestral and necromantic and more actually going out and doing things in what we can call quote unquote nature, and just trying to be a little bit more about understanding this really beautiful place. It's paradise. I live in paradise. I can go snowboarding during the day and I can come home and go kayaking at night, right? Like that's insane. And I love both activities. I'm living in paradise, but there is this real aspect of hell here, like that, in that Miltonian sense, that you can't have one without the other. And my magic has truly just been trying to not understand it or have answers, but to see how I situate myself. So that's truly what has been happening. And of course, the podcast has just been going along as it is. I've been doing that, and that's always been a whole thing. And what's great about my podcast is that it allows me to bring in aspects of my practice which have been put on the back burner. So over the last year, I did some more stuff on scrying, and I tried scrying a little bit more, and I'm still crap at it. But the one that I've really enjoyed recently is there was this large break that I did in the summer, and just with guests canceling and me trying to figure things out, I went and did an episode about about a Ouija boards. And man, I love Ouija boards. I've always loved Ouija boards. And so my practice has kind of gone back to using spirit boards and talking boards. So
cool.
How that fits in with the whole more nature-based spirit interactions is something I'm still trying to figure out. But my job is so fun because I wherever the wind blows is kind of where it goes as far as my Patreon stuff, which
Yeah.
I truly think is my best material, in the sense that it's far more personalized, and I get to talk about how people get to see how I magically see the world for the most part. And, so yeah, when I'm doing an episode on Ouija, I'll learn everything that there is to learn about Ouija, and then I'll start doing things with the Ouija boards. So yeah, man, I I I hope this doesn't sound like bragging, but I'm so lucky that this is my job. I'm so lucky that I get to do this, and I make I make a little bit of cash.
One of the things I was going to ask is, because I mean, you mentioned there when you talk about Ouija boards, is that like you pick up and you'd learn kind of everything you find about Ouija boards, and then construct shows, which are lectures, which are talks on the subjects.
Yeah.
And I'm absolutely fascinated by the kind of the breadth of subjects that you can absorb and digest and kind of metastasize, and not only kind of relay, okay, here's your Cliff Notes version of everything, but also here's what I think, here's my angle, here's my kind of perception and view of it. And I just find it absolutely brilliant. I really do, like, because just there's such a breadth of subjects that you can speak to, which I don't. A lot of people think they just don't have that kind of capability, and like,
Yeah.
where does it come from? How do you have this fucking amazing memory? How and mind about it.
I've always had a really good memory. It shocks my parents, the things that I remember, and there's been a lot of conversations recently about photographic memory not really being a thing, but
Right.
And I would never say that I have what people
Yeah.
back in the '90s would describe as a photographic memory. But if things are important to me, I'm able to squirrel it away, and I've just always had this ability. And when I was, God, I forget, but 23 when I first read The Art of Memory by Francis Yates, the scholar Francis Yates. There were segments in there that I recognized as like how I could remember things. I remember certain aspects of things that is very visual to me. And when I read, I don't think it's a form of synesthesia, but like when I read certain things in certain aspects, they appear to me very visually, and then that's how I'm able to bring them up so much. But I've always had a really good memory.
Mm-hmm.
My influences for my podcasts aren't other podcasts. My main influence for how I do things is I was obsessed, and I'm still obsessed with this. So he's a historian, a television presenter of the history of science, a gentleman by the name of James Burke. He produced a series of programs in the 80s and 90s called Connections, and then another show called The Day the Universe Changed. I would just watch these on repeat, and it wasn't because of the information that he was presenting, although to begin with it was, because it's very, very fascinating stuff, but how he presented it, and just like how he was able to make these things. He would talk about concepts like Schliemann photography and how that became how we design jets, supersonic jets, and things like this, which is like really, it's very, very scientific stuff. But the way that he was able to break it down so that it's really understandable. I would rewatch Connections 1, 2, and 3 over and over and over again, because the way that he would present information was brilliant and special. And apparently they're making a new series, and he's been off. He hasn't made a television show in over 30 years.
Wow.
But yeah, so my major influence is mostly him. I love Carl Sagan's Cosmos. Carl Sagan also is another one of those guys. But mainly my biggest influence are 80s and 90s documentaries of science and history, right? Before Discovery Channel became a giant shit, like we'll just follow people on crab boats, they used to put up documentaries that would be very educational.
Yeah.
And I would like to watch things like that. But for the most part, it's just my memory. This stuff is very interesting to me, but my influences as far as how to relay information so it's easy for people to understand and also tells a story at the same time is something that I truly worked at. So it's that's truly it. But yeah, I love sharing more than anything. I like sharing, and let's not beat around the bush. The occult and magic and esoteric philosophy is not easy for people who come to it new, right? It's not. It's really hard to understand. So I've just tried to relay that information in the most easy to understand way that also allows people to see my perspective. And that's it. But thank you so much, Dara. This is really appreciated. But it doesn't come naturally. Is what I'm saying is it doesn't come naturally as far as like how my show is constructed. I work at it, and I'm doing an episode on this. Most likely it'll be out before this show's out. I'm doing an episode about Jack Parsons, which should be dropping on Friday or something like that. But the amount of information about Jack Parsons, it's been really tough because if you don't already know about Thelema, trying to explain to people like, so this is what he did. Yeah. This is what he did for the Babylon working. Yeah. I'm just like, oh my God. Like, how do I make this palatable? So it's work. Everything's a lot of work.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, did you read? Have you had a look at Peter Gray's his last book,
Two Antichrists?
Yeah,
loved it. Fantastic. Yeah, Peter is a very special writer, and I love the way he writes. I like if you go into an occult bookstore or like a new age bookstore, most of the I'm really hope this doesn't sound like I'm shitting on everybody contemporary who's writing contemporarily. Most people sound exactly the same when they write. Like most people when they talk about this stuff, Peter's got a true, very distinctive voice, and I absolutely love the way that he writes. And that book, The Two Antichrists, it's funny because he talks about, on one hand, he talks about Jack Parsons, and on the other hand, he talks about L. Ron Hubbard. And I'm familiar with Jack Parsons enough. I loved the stuff that he was talking about L. Ron Hubbard. I thought that was the most fascinating part of that book. Everything.
Yeah.
Man, I didn't know about these things called the affirmations. L. Ron Hubbard once sat down in front of a recording device, and he had these affirmations. It was like the year before he wrote Dianetics. And to a layman, these affirmations just looks like so silly. They just look like any kind of Emile Coué inspired affirmations. But the shit that he has in that affirmations is really bizarre. And he talks about, I hope, I know your show is explicit for adults only, but he talks about masturbation a lot. He talks in L. Ron Hubbard. I think, I don't want to say that because this is an oversimplification, but dude was really hung up about, and probably because of his family, really hung up about self-eroticism. And in the affirmations, that comes through very starkly. So take that for what it's worth. But it wasn't until I read that book, and it was like, what is this? This is very fascinating and an interesting rabbit hole. But no, I loved The Two Antichrists. It was a very fascinating read.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I've really got to get myself a copy. Like, I want to get I don't know about you, but I can tell to a degree because it's behind you how much books mean to you. Like, but there's certain books that, like, I'll buy the paperback, and if I really get hung up on it, then I'm like, I have to go and get the hard copy now.
I've done that.
Yeah. I'm at the moment. I've been an awful lot this year. I've been reading Robin Ardison. So I've got that's going to blur there, but this is
right.
Cool. Yeah, it's absolutely wonderful. And
I recently did that with Joshua Cutchin's his Ecology of Souls. I bought the ebook because I'm Scots Irish. I'm cheap. Oh no, I'll just say that I'm cheap. So I was like, 2 books for one on and truthfully, this was the first thing of Josh's that I read, and I'm kicking myself in retrospect. The first thing that I read was Ecology of Souls of his. And meanwhile, everybody for ages had been yelling in my ear, have you checked out Josh's work? Have you checked out Josh's work? And I was like, no, just never came around to it. So he dropped this enormous book, 2 books in one for an EPUB digitally. And I started reading it. And then halfway through the first one, it's like, I'm buying both books. I need this. And like, I need to hold this in my hands. Like, so it happens.
And they're so good. They're so good. I mean, Joshua's consistently does fantastic work. I loved his Thieves in the Night is fantastic.
I have I've devoured almost everything. I still have to finish Where the Footprint Ends, the second volume, but I've read everything.
Yeah.
His book, The Brimstone Deceit, like, if you were to try and tell me that it would be an interesting book maybe 5 years ago, I'd be like, nah, I'll pass. But it's one of my favorites. I love. He has a book about mysterious smells and smells and how they relate. It's incredible. It's so good.
Yeah, and it's just such a vast amount of research, because when he was on Spirit Books, for Ecology of Souls, I think I just finished, or I was a couple of months after finishing my book, and kind of just looking at the amount of research, like the appendices alone are fucking huge, and I was just like, I'm blown away by your ability. How did you write so much? This is fucking insane. And he was telling me though, he sometimes he can just bosh out like 5,000 words a day. And I'm like, fuck me. Jesus, dude, that's fucking incredible. Like I mean, that for people who were kind of listening, going, yeah, and it's like, if you're writing something that has to make logical sense and be robust and actually have a narrative that fits in itself, so the chapter works as a unit and then fits in a wider fucking pattern of the book, to be able to do that kind of volume of word count in a day is remarkable. Normally that's like, to do it well and be, pulled together, that's going to take you, could take a couple of days or a week or something like that. And that's a good one. That means you're flying.
There are some people who I truly think are born to do certain things, and some of us and some people are lucky enough to be able to do that for their life. I hope Josh writes for the rest of his life, and it's going to be one of those things where literally every time, like, this is literally right behind me. This is Josh's new book, that Old Ways Never Died. Fantastic! It's
his fiction book, isn't it?
Yeah, it's great.
Brilliant.
I hope he never stops writing. Josh is a born writer, and I have to say, I love. We were just talking about Peter Gray. I love everything that Peter's done. Apocalyptic Witchcraft was a book that just like hit me sideways, changed my world. Ecology of Souls by Joshua Cutchin is another one. Like, this is one of those books like The Supernatural by Jeffrey Kripal and Whitley Strieber. It's like, done. You've just changed my world. Like, great. This book will be with me for the rest of my life.
Yeah. So it's a wonderful, wonderful piece. And you touched on one there, Apocalyptic Witchcraft. I had a really interesting one with that because I interviewed Peter and Alkistis for my book, and kind of I wanted to kind of ask them about kind of two things. And then I fucked up the interview because I was just started talking about these synchronicities that had happened in the run up to interviewing them, because I wanted to actually ask them about. I'll kiss this about kind of like the kind of the position of dance at the Sabbath, and kind of the state of the mental state of the dancer, the trance, all that kind of stuff. And Peter around kind of like the devil aspect. And in advance for that interview, I was like, well, I was going through the material and kind of read the Brazen Vessel and read
so good.
Yeah,
that is one of my favorites. I literally just put it back on the shelf, but I was going through it. I go through that book so often. It's a favorite.
That's wonderful. But I read Apocalyptic Witchcraft, and it was one of those ones where I had to close the book and go, fuck me. And because what had happened was in the run up to it, in the run to that interview, I was actually writing a chapter talking about the connection between kind of caves as our first temples and the dark womb beneath them. And I speak specifically to a piece of cave art in France called The Sorcerer, in a cave called the Trois Frères Cave. And I talk about this kind of the composite being and blah, blah, blah. And so I was writing all about that, the cave, the dark womb. And then this is one of the ones where the chapter where it went extremely quickly, everything came through, and it's like I was just writing away, and I'm like, I barely remember what I've written. It just comes straight through, where someone else takes the wheel. But what happened is I was then kind of 2 days later after I'd written that, and this is a singular piece of cave art, right? It's famous, but it's not like the fucking Coke can logo. It's not like ubiquitously fucking recognized, right? It's a bit of fucking cave art. And I was in the British Museum, and I was waiting to go and meet my friend Elise Ursa nearby for a beer, and just knocking about, picked up a book. I was like a kind of a bestiary, like in the book in the bookshop, the gift shop in the British Museum. Big kind of thick.
Which one? There's like 14 of them.
yeah, they're everywhere, aren't they? Yeah. I just picked one up and I opened it, and it was on that image.
Yeah.
Right? And I'm like, okay, fucking hairs in the back of the neck go up. I know I'm on something now. And then 2 weeks later or so, I'm prepping to interview Peter and Lucas, and he talks about the same piece of fucking cave art, Occult Witchcraft, and I'm just like, fucking hell. It's like ding ding ding, okay, I guess this is something.
Does Graham Hancock talk about that in Supernatural? That piece that you're talking about?
I don't know. I can't remember. It's so long since I read that. I mean, it's years ago since I read that. I know he talks about there's a cave in northern Spain where the big kind of the guy who discovered it basically got derailed and got taken down by kind of the then academia.
Right.
Still kind of one of the guys who was pursuing him in his reputation went to the cave, I think, after the guy died, and was like, oh, I was totally wrong. This is unbelievable piece of art. Yeah,
I think, did we talk about Graham Hancock last time? We talked about Graham and so it's, for some reason, again, it's like, do we just talk about the same things anytime we
might do? It's quite possible. yeah, totally. But that's a good book. That Graham Hancock is great. Yeah. Doesn't he open it up with, like, I think he opens the book, the opening chapters, with him taking a bogain.
He's sitting on the couch taking a bogain, and he's like, time to go to a different world. And
that drug sounds,
he's being dragged.
It doesn't sound like a fun drug, that particular one, bogain. But
I had a friend who did it, and he said never again.
Yeah, that sounds horrendous.
He had a friend to do it. He's like, this is a friend who's a willing and he's a psychonaut. He enjoys it. Like, this part, he's not irresponsible, but he's like, he wants to experience these things. And he's just said, that's not for me. That is not, like, there's certain drugs that are certainly probably very cultural. And he's like, that he's just like, that was one that wasn't for me. He recognized immediately, is like, that's very different ecosystem that collapses around you when you do certain substances. And that one was not for him. So.
Ooh, that sounds a bit hairy. Yeah. That's definitely one to avoid. So you mentioned there that you've kind of adjusted your magical practice. You've kind of zoned in on kind of your territory, the landscape, and kind of the memories there, the ghosts there. It's really interesting that you say that, because you're talking about kind of city magic beforehand, and I was just thinking when you were saying that and I've lived in cities for a long time. It never really happened for me there. It's like the minute I go out to the sticks, where I live now, and kind of where I grew up as well, it's like fucking it's all going off when I'm at boonies. But in the cities I don't get very much at all,
You're very lucky though, Darren, and I'm just going to say here, and I hope this is not me overstepping. You release videos on your Patreon of your little garden, and I loved them. I was like, anytime you dropped a video, I was like, oh, I love this. man, you're very lucky that you have that. And
Oh yeah.
I know you've got family and everything, but man, I would be a tinkering. I would be doing stuff out there. So, yeah, I understand what you're saying though.
Mhm.
Were you raised, rurally?
Yeah, I mean, for kind of at least half my kind of childhood was in a
Yeah.
rural area. I mean, and then kind of small town rural, but like went from County Dublin to like the west coast of Ireland, and you know,
Yeah.
it was like, I mean, basically moving. I wouldn't say just moving country. It's like moving time zone, like era.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
there's like for every mile between Dublin and the west coast, you're slipping back 5 years, 3 years. It's just totally different culture.
But you're right now, Dara. You're in like the most magical place. Like as far
Yeah.
as cities are concerned,
Mm-hmm.
like it doesn't. Maybe Paris,
Mm-hmm.
maybe Venice.
Yeah, yeah,
Like
yeah.
I can't
Well,
think of another place.
well, I mean, it's. I mean, I don't live near London. Like I go, I occasionally, kind of go in.
Yeah.
And it's a magnificent place. It has its ups and downs. It has its problems. A bed bug outbreak. It's one thing all over the transport system at the moment, which is pretty grim.
Oh no.
Yeah. Apparently it's horrendous in Paris. Apparently. I know. I mean, I'm getting my news from like shitty tabloids, like so.
Okay.
I could be very fucking off the mark on that one, but yeah, there's so much there. But it's I guess what I'm saying really is that kind of being closer to nature. I I think I'm on a closer vibe to that. You know, I find it easier. Um, I don't really have to do that much, to be honest. They come knocking on my door.
Right? Yeah, I think that's kind of one of the things that I've realized, particularly since over the last 20 years since moving away. I lived very rurally, very, very rural, like a place where the population of the town was 400 people.
Right.
The place I live now has got a population in and around the whole area, in and around about 100,000 people. So, it's not a small place, but it's not exactly a giant place. But the place is very nature adjacent.
Yeah.
I can drive 5 minutes and then I'm in a place where I can walk around and I won't see another human being. I could walk around for 3 hours and I'm not going to see
That's
another
cool.
human being. Yeah, yeah. So it's really wonderful. But I understand what you're saying because when I was living in cities in Alberta and living in cities in Ontario, my magic was just like I really had to work at it. I really had to do
Hmm.
things to get results, and the whole necromancy thing. After I kind of dumped the Golden Dawn and Thelema stuff and started doing more stuff based on like Greco-Egyptian magic
Yeah.
and more chthonic and necromantic practices, that's when things got a little bit easier because I feel that those places are kind of charged by bodies.
Yeah.
I hate to say it, bodies and things of that nature. But um, yeah, now that I'm back out here, it's very, it's, would I say it's easier? I would say that I know what I need to do quicker than I did when I was
Mhm.
in a city where it would be like I'd have to plan everything. It would be like, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. And
Yeah.
now it's just like, I just head out. I know what I need to do. Everything just kind of appears for me. It's very, very intuitive. So I know, yeah,
Yeah.
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. It feels like you kind of, you're able to go with the current a bit more.
Yeah.
Once land accepts you, and kind of,
Yeah.
but just from how you were positioning things, which I thought was just very empathetic, and thoughtful. It doesn't surprise me that you can ride the waves there.
I'm still learning though. Um, I really hope people don't like think that this is really hoity-toity or anyways, but the level of sadness and just absolute atrocity that exists within the colonial enterprise of Western Canada and the Western United States is truly terrifyingly sad. And it's tough once you start learning about it. Once you start learning more and more. I'm not. I don't want this to. I want again, and I keep giving myself a bit of a preface before I talk. But I don't. I don't want people to think that like I move here, things were a little bit dicey. I found a key, I unlocked it, and now the secrets of magic of spirit place are. No, that's not. This is an ongoing process that I'm going through of just trying to learn about the beliefs of the people in the area that are still very much a part of the culture of this place that I live in. There's a very interesting thing that happens though when what is occurring now, wherein more credence and more space is being given back to the original peoples of this area, the nations that exist here. Beforehand, their stories are now finally given space. And then we have this other aspect of the people who are of a lineage of Europeans, mostly German and English, and their beliefs and things. There's woods here, and there's woods all around the place where I live. And perhaps if people Google, they'll know exactly where I live. But there's forests with elf doors and gnome houses and fairy houses. And there's all over the place, and those aren't just for kids. Like those are erected and have been erected. They come from that kind of European rights relation that we can't really shake. Us white people can't really shake. And that tension, and that collision that exists here is one that I'm really finding to be very fruitful as far as my personal practices are concerned. Yeah, man, it's not easy, and my job's not done, but it's a very cool thing that I think has been happening in my life, and I'm very glad that I'm able to make space for it, truly, because I work a lot. I also work a lot, and it gets a bit rushed around, but every once in a while I had a period of time where there's this place where I've been doing a lot of my stuff, and I did a Patreon episode where I was talking about spirit houses, Thai spirit houses, and ideas of like fairy houses and things like that, and the kind of the intersections of them. So I've been doing some stuff with that, and there had been a period of time where I hadn't been back to that area, and well over 2 months, and then I decided to come. I've only lived here since May of 2022, so it hasn't been a long time. But yeah, when I went back there, and it's like, oh yeah, okay, we shan't let that happen again. So it's now back to like just regularly setting routines. It's hard. It's hard. Magical practice, and continually doing things. It's tough, and I'm not. I think a lot of people think that I'm an expert in magic, and I'm doing magic all the time and stuff like that. But a lot of times, my work is my ongoing magical process. It's so it's hard to make space. Is what I'm trying to say, I guess.
Well, I mean, I suppose it's one of those things. There is that tension between, what you're researching and creating, wonderful shows about, versus doing. There's a classic challenge there, right? That's
Yeah. Well, what was lucky in what I mentioned earlier, when the Ouija stuff came around, that seemed fortuitous, and so and that was literally done under influence of, and I've given them flowers and stuff, so I'm sure they're fine with me saying this, but it was one of those things where I was having so many problems with my podcast, and I literally had 2 guests canceled the day of, and I do a lot of work before I get my guests on the show. So it was like I just wasted like 5 weeks of research. Not wasted, but it's just like it's on the back burner.
Yeah.
I was exhausted. My show hadn't come out for more than 2.5 months, and podcasts are like bonfires. You got to keep giving people things, or else they find other places to go. And I just with my answers like what needs to happen, and they're like, get an Ouija board. I'm like, okay, cool, get an Ouija board. We'll talk then. And they're like, no, you bonehead, do the Ouija board. It's like, okay. So then I just did that episode on Ouija boards. And then that gets brought into my practice. So I get lucky with certain things where I'm able to, my show dovetails into my magical practice.
Yeah.
It gets lucky. Again, current thing I'm doing is about Jack Parsons, and I'm not going back to doing any kind of scrying the aethers or anything like that.
Yeah.
But every once in a while I do get lucky. my interest also intersects with what I want to do magically.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. Um, in, one of the things I kind of wanted to ask you as well, I mean, around that kind of direction of the show, um, like how much, I mean, if any, do you feel like there's an unseen hand, or like do is there an entity that is almost there along with you, or bubbling up, or
For the Patreon stuff, all right, again, Doug with his preface. Or here's another preface. So it might just be me that I'm working so much that I forget certain things. But a lot of the times with my Patreon shows, I'll make them, and I've just kind of like forgotten that I've made them. And then every once in a while, I'll go back to revisit them, and I'm just like, holy moly! Like, how did that even come about? And particularly, I did one about. I did a short episode. It was about half an hour on the cosmogenesis of the Gnostic universe, things the Yaldabaoth and Sophia and the Archons and things like that. But I did it to the background of Holtz's Planet Suite, and I don't remember doing that ever. Like, I don't even remember doing it. Like,
wow.
I don't remember. And I was like, what? So is that just, was I just working too much? But like, I was shocked. I'm like, when did this even happen? So part of me is like, maybe there is. For my regular podcast, and I hate to say it, for my regular podcast, it's very, very mechanical. I ask guests to come on show for the most part. I do a ton of research. I put the things together, and it's very, people know what they're getting for those episodes. It's pretty, each episode, although the subject is different, it kind of follows the same format,
right.
Which is familiar to most people. It's the podcast stuff, particularly with things like which direction that I want to go with it. The beginning of the show, I can't remember. I asked Cyprian for inspiration. Cyprian is not a saint one goes to for inspiration, artistic inspiration.
Mm-hmm.
But I asked. I was just like, let's see where this goes. I have no idea where the title "What Magic Is This" came from. I have no idea. Like the whole crozier symbolism that I put throughout my logos and stuff like that. I don't know where that came from. So maybe it might have worked. I guess my answer to the question is that I ask for influences a lot of times. It's from my ancestors and things of that nature for my Patreon stuff. Sometimes every once in a while, I don't know where it comes from. I can't say whether or not it's influenced from somewhere else. But then every once in a while, I'll just be shocked. Like, when did I do this? And what even happened? Like, some of them I remember, some of them I don't, and so I can't really say whether or not that's. But I hope this doesn't sound like I'm dodging the question. But I kind of, at this point, Dara, I'm open to everything, and I try not to analyze whether or not that might be an influence. And it's not because like I'm some magus seer who's constantly bombarded by the influences of infernal spirits. I talked to like 5 years ago when I was doing dabblings with things like the Ars Goetia, but I am very blessed by getting influences for things that I don't even question them or where they come from. It just happens. So I think a lot of people, and I'll put it this way, and I'm sorry if this sounds like I'm going out on a tangent. A lot of people really dislike Neil Gaiman, particularly people who are magical, because in part of them, they see this person who is very much of their kin. He's an infinitely creative man. His whole way that he concocted the world of dreaming and his sisters within the Sandman leads one to believe that he's a very magical person. He's a masterful storyteller. But anytime he's asked about where he gets his ideas from, he gives like the most glib answers. He's like, oh, they come from my head and stuff like that. And so people really dislike Neil Gaiman. And for that, particularly people who are magically operant, they really dislike where he comes from. But I also understand that. Because that's the only way that he can contextualize it. As far as like my influences, and I'm not as creative as Neil Gaiman is in any way, shape, or form with how I concoct any of my shows, be they my Patreon or otherwise. sometimes the influences are best when they're not given over to any kind of explanation, or just when I'm not thinking about where they come from,
Yeah.
or if they could come from a different source. I will say I specifically go to, sometimes when I'm in a bind, I will specifically go to my ancestors, just sit with them and be like, can you just put a stiff wind somewhere so that my head will go in that direction? Because I really need help. And for the most part, I'm usually answered in some way. And so I'm very lucky in that regard. But for something like what you're talking about, like chapters writing themselves, the closest I have to that is that weird Gnostic episode. I didn't even know I made it. I listened to it and it was like I was listening to, I listened to it again about 3 months ago. It was like somebody else did it. I don't remember. I must have been at my old place. So that was a really bizarre one. That one threw me for a loop, but I was like, oh, when did I do this?
That's interesting.
Yeah, that's long-winded answer to your question, but I think it happens. I'm just not one that I can clearly say,
Right.
yes, that was something else.
It's so intriguing. Like I find the whole process of creativity just, I mean, so adjacent to magic, you know. But I didn't realize that about Neil Gaiman, and it kind of makes me laugh. I almost admire that mundane answer. It's like,
me too.
you know, you're like be expecting that kind of level of like this multi-layer stories of this, and it's always tapping into these kind of like archetypal mythos. I mean, he's a remarkable capability for it. You know, how did you come up with the story? I just thought of it.
Yeah. Like to this day, Sandman is still, I think, it's such a beautiful book, and it's such a rich world, just really beautifully filled world of story. So we all have, like, if those of us who are magicians and practitioners, we're like, he must be one of us. So when he gives answers like that, I understand why people would be hurt and be like, well, fuck you, Neil. Like, but truly, he also has deadlines. He also has and so he's also a human being. But I truly, part of me is also like, I really do think Neil is a magician in some way, like Alan Moore level magician. Like, he really is able to conjure some, and that he's still producing work of such great quality.
Yeah.
Consistently, right? Like he definitely is. But you know, I don't suspect that he'll do the Grant Morrison, Alan Moore thing and ever, you know, just be like, I'm an out and out magician. But
yeah. Well, mate, people don't want to find your work. I mean, it's almost sounds ludicrous because everyone who listens to this show knows who you are. So,
I hope.
But if they don't, where would they find you?
Go to whatmagicisthis.com, all one word. You can find all of my stuff there. For people who say you've never listened to my show, go to the menu, click on episodes, and just find something there that interests you. I guarantee you there'll be at least one thing there that you'll be like, oh, that's kind of cool. I'll have a listen. And then listen to it, and then go through the show notes on that, because I spend a lot of time on picking out show notes, like so many hours. I vet. There's nothing up there that I haven't read, for the most part, as far as show notes are concerned. But I'm on Instagram. I'm on Facebook. I'm on whatever's Elon is calling that platform that used to be Twitter. I think it's called X now. Gary, you're not missing much. I'm just telling you that, man. You're not missing much.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, but everything available at whatmagicisthis.com. That's my main podcast. And I'm just going to say I have a Patreon as well. Patreon.com/whatmagicisthis. If you enjoy my show, come on up to the Patreon. I don't say this because I just want your money. I really enjoy what I do on the Patreon. I try something different. I do things differently on the Patreon. You get to see a little bit more magical stuff and listen to podcast episodes. I don't want this to sound like I'm tooting my own horn, but I don't think anybody's making stuff like I do on the Patreon right now. I don't think anybody's doing these kind of weird.
You know, I'm a proud patron of yours, and fantastic community. And I mean, the show we were discussing earlier was one of the Patreon shows. You know, so it's great stuff. You know, and you know, if you enjoy the interviews and indeed kind of the fantastic informative lectures that Douglas does in his main podcast, the Patreon is going to be a gold mine for you.
Yeah.
Lots of stuff there. It's wonderful. Well,
but everything. Whatmagicisthis.com. That's it. That's all. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure. Lovely to have you back.
Dara, my God, man, it's always such. I love talking to you. And one of these days, I'm not just saying this as a threat. One of these days, I'm gonna get that ticket. I'm gonna fly over the Arctic. I'm gonna land on the rainy turf, the rainy terrain that is.
I'm fucking ankle deep at the moment, man. It's horrendous. And
same here.
Yeah,
I'm on an island too, man. It rains on islands. That's what happens. It's just like,
oh well, man. Yeah, whenever you arrive, me casa su casa.
We'll just hang out at the British Museum all day, just looking for synchronicities within all 18 of their gift shops, man. I love the British Museum, but holy moly, they want your money. They won't get your money at the door because you can go in for free.
Yeah,
but they'll try to get your money elsewhere.
The whole like for those who haven't been, it's like there's a massive kind of amazing concourse when you go into the place, but there's a huge kind of like big circular monolith kind of in front of you. It's like a fucking giant linga, and then it's just inside that it's just gift shop after gift shop. Yeah.
And you might be able to get kind of close to the Rosetta Stone if you wait like 15 hours. You might be able to see this really incredible thing. But
I tell you what, you will be able to see really easy though. You'll be able to see John Dee's, stone and the and there's what is this Syllogium Day? I can never pronounce it. Yeah.
That was cool.
Over that.
One of these days, I'm gonna come back to jolly old England. We'll go there. Like, we'll have a great time. But Dara, this has always been so amazing. It's wonderful. I'm just gonna say, like, speaking as a member of it, the magical podcast community is so amazing. Everybody is so nice to each other. There's for the most part, most people are really nice with each other. And I'm so lucky to call you a friend and fellow podcaster. And I can't wait to have you back on my show. We've got something planned. It's going to be a little bit, but Dara's going to be back on What Magic Is This? And we're going to talk about some interesting stuff. And so I can't wait to have you back on the show. And thank you again for having me, Dara.
Oh, it's been a pleasure, man. Pleasure. Thank you, Douglas. I really enjoyed that. I hope you guys did too. Do check the show notes. There's a whole wealth of info there. Some real fantastic stuff to have a look at. I'm Dara Mason, and you've been listening to Spirit Box. Take care and talk soon.